Hello and welcome everyone. Today I want to present my top 4 minion league starters for Settlers of Kalguur. This league is quite the upheaval in terms of minion builds. For example, physical and cold conversion builds got hit hard by the rework of banners and the changes to hatred. The insane Spectres from Affliction League will also make a return, albeit in a lesser state. Since we don't know the exact numbers in terms of power and accessibility via ritual, I decided to not include any of the Spectres in the PoBs to not inflate the damage of the builds. This doesn't mean the Spectres aren't useful for the following builds. Most of them will be able to make use of at least one of the itemized Spectres, which I'll be talking about in more detail later on. I also left campaign skill setups and passive trees for leveling in all PoBs for those struggling with early progression. The first build I like to present to you is the Dominating Blow Guardian. This build is a melee minion hybrid and has to be leveled as Absolution or SRS until you can access the skill gem in Act 3. It's a melee attack that has a hit-based component that deals damage and inflicts enemies with a debuff that transforms their corpse into a Sentinel of Dominance if killed within a second. In addition to that, the skill also has a 25% chance to summon a Sentinel when hitting a unique enemy, which enables bossing with this build. The maximum amount of normal Sentinels of Dominance is 9, whereas the Val version can hold 3 charges and allows you to ascend up to 3 Sentinels. The regular Sentinels have a melee attack, use shield charge to close the gap, and can use a powerful slam that has a 5-second cooldown. In addition to the 9 normal Sentinels, you can also have 3 magic and 1 rare Sentinel while doing map-like content. These Sentinels will inherit the modifiers from the enemies they spawn from, including powerful mods like Auras or Soul Eater. If that wasn't enough, you can use the Behead support gem, which grants more damage against enemies on low life, and allows the minion that dealt the killing blow to gain 1 modifier from a rare enemy for 20 seconds, which can be refreshed by killing more enemies. This is even more relevant for the Ascendant Sentinels because they take 70% less damage, deal 200% more damage, and have powerful AoE abilities. The Val skill always ascends the rare Sentinel first, followed by the Magic Sentinel, and only in the absence of those will it choose normal ones. They also inherit the modifiers from the Sentinel before the Ascension, which in combination with the mod granted from Behead support will significantly increase clear speed and even boss kills in map-like content. The Ascendant Sentinels have a base duration of 30 seconds and can be refreshed by using Val Domination again, which is possible due to the relatively low soul gain prevention timer. I recommend the physical instead of the elemental version because, unlike BAMA or animated weapon, the Sentinels of Dominance don't scale well with flat added damage, which is what you're mostly getting from the elemental relics for attack based minions. Since you're constantly hitting enemies, you can make use of Holy Relic, which will grant you and your minions additional life regen. Since you're constantly hitting enemies, you can make use of Holy Relic, which will grant you and your minions additional life regen. This also allows you to use the Scourge, which is a great starting unique for Dominating Blow because it requires a melee weapon to function. The other items you need are rares with life, resistances, and attributes. You can throw in the Skullhead for additional minion survivability, or go with a rare helmet with life and resistances for player defenses. A Shaper influenced shield with percentage life recovery on block can help with recovery early on. The Jinxed Juju mitigates hit-based damage and should be anointed with Decay Ward for minion survivability. In the low budget, I recommend Marta's Teaching because it scales minion damage while also enabling attack skills. It's better than before due to the increase in base critical strike chance, but this is somewhat offset by the removal of Dread Banner. The Surrender provides even more recovery and better defenses than a rare shield and should be prioritized as an upgrade. A rare helmet with +2 levels of minion skill gems, reservation efficiency, and minion movement speed as implicit round out the build. For the flasks, you want to get a life flask that removes bleeding and corrupted blood, Rumis for armor and block chance, a Quicksilver flask for increased movement speed, a Basalt flask for even more armor, and last but not least, an Amethyst flask with the appropriate suffix for elemental and chaos resistances. The Cobalt Jewels should feature life and minion damage, whereas the Ghastly Eye Jewel in the belt should have life, minion attack speed, and taunt if possible. The Animate Guardian should have Relentless Fury for Culling Strike, Leer Cast for increased minion damage, Wake of Destruction for Shock Ground, Hunter Influenced Gloves for Intimidate, and Xandathis' Cassock in combination with Broken Faith for Profane Ground. For the Spectres, you want to use 2 Demon Harpies for the debuff and a Carnage Chieftain for Frenzy Charges. In terms of the Affliction Spectres, I recommend the Perfect Blood Demon for the Aura, which allows you to replace your Pride with Flesh and Stone for more damage or better defenses depending on the stance. You can either get this as a 4th Spectre once you get your hand on a level 21 race Spectre gem, or as a replacement for the Carnage Chieftain. My next build is Lightning BAMA on the Necromancer. The skill gem used here is Blink Arrow of Bombarding Clones, which summons minions that use a monster version of Rain of Arrows, which makes the build fast, have great clear speed, and decent single target DPS. It's a rather strange minion since it uses your bow and quiver, and thus plays like a bow minion hybrid. Now this isn't true BAMA, because we're only using the Blink Arrow of Bombarding Clones, since they share the same maximum number of clones with the corresponding Transfigured Mirror Arrow gem, and a shared 5-link setup would therefore be useless. Using the Prismatic clones also doesn't make sense, because they choose an element for every attack, then convert all physical damage to that type of elemental damage, without being able to do any other elemental damage. You want to use the Blink Arrow version because it can also be used as a movement skill, which allows you to quickly traverse large distances as long as you scale down its cooldown. You want to do this not just for mobility, but mainly to keep fresh meat support active at all times, because it's a large boost in DPS. In addition to that, you also need to increase minion duration, which we do via Enduring Bond and Mistress of Sacrifice. The easiest way to reduce the cooldown early on is with a Bow Mastery. For the Necromancer, this is a bit awkward because we have to travel all the way down to a bow cluster since there aren't any near the starting location. We also have to pick up some aura and spell suppression nodes, including Magebane, since this build is not using block as a layer of defense. Instead, it uses evasion and spell suppression, which we mostly get from the tree early on. The evasion mostly comes from Grace, which we use in combination with Purity of Elements to get immunity against elemental ailments. In order to fit the defensive as well as some offensive auras, we need a lot of reservation efficiency and a Guardian's Blessing setup for Wrath. This requires a sacrificial minion, and the best option, in my opinion, is Holy Relic, since it follows you and provides you and your minions with a regen aura whenever you hit enemies with your Blink Arrow. You could alternatively use Mirror Arrow of Prismatic Clones if that playstyle suits you better. Since spamming Blink Arrow is quite resource intensive, we have to allocate Eldritch Battery to solve the mana issues of the build. Just like the build before, it also requires you to level either SRS or Absolution early on and switch once you manage to procure the Transfigured Gem via lab or trade. The dexterity requirements for the gem are much higher than what you would get by progressing naturally through the passive tree, so you're going to have to allocate some dexterity nodes in addition to using items with added dexterity like a Jade Amulet. Since you don't really need the dexterity nodes for the initial leveling setup, I've split up the leveling tree. Switching between the different trees requires a minimal amount of passive refunds, which are covered by the campaign rewards. The same is also true for the campaign skill guide. I've left a full leveling setup with SRS for the entire campaign, in case you don't get Blink Arrow of Bombarding Clones early on, and another one once you procure the Transfigured Gem. Keep in mind that you need a bow and quiver when switching from SS to Blink Arrow of Bombarding Clones, so start picking up rare bows and quivers in Act 2 and onward. For the quiver, you want added damage and life, whereas the bow should have as much combined physical, elemental, and chaos damage as possible. You can have up to 3 clones that hit single targets between 3 and 4 times, and the easiest way of calculating this is by simply putting 9 clones into the PoB. The smaller the AoE, the more hits you get, so concentrated effect is mandatory for single target damage. We're starting out with 2 5-links early on, one for your Blink Arrow of Bombarding Clones and the other for your utility minions. For the League Start gear, you need a 5-link bow with added lightning damage and attack speed, as well as a quiver that features damage and life. The rest of the gear is more comparable to the other builds. It's important to note that all items have to be evasion based to activate the evasion mastery that provides 15% chance to suppress spell damage. The boots and the gloves should also feature some spell suppression to get capped early on. One way of getting additional spell suppression is by anointing a quick step, which should be pretty affordable even on League Start. The chest should be evasion and energy shield based to get enough energy shield for the Eldritch battery setup, and because this base type tends to be unpopular, decreasing the cost of the 6-link chest. For the low budget, you should also get a helmet with +2 levels to minion skill gems and reservation efficiency as an implicit, as well as a 6-linked bow. You can craft this one by using Shrieking Essences of Fear until you hit a decent flat added lightning mod, so tier 3 or tier 2, and craft the attack speed modifier. The main difference in regards to the flasks are a Jade flask for evasion instead of the Amethyst flask. For the jewels, you want Ghastly Eye jewels with flat added lightning damage and attack speed. The AG features gear that is similar to the other builds, but uses a hunter influenced chest for recovery and the oppressor to increase survivability against spells. For the Spectres, you want to use a Pale Seraphim and the Primal Rex Matriarch for the debuff. This build greatly profits from the Affliction Spectres and should thus replace the aforementioned Spectres as soon as possible. The Perfect Blasphemer and the Perfect Spirit of Fortune are the best fit, with the latter allowing you to replace your Wrath with Haste for more damage and even better mobility. This build will scale exceedingly well into the late game and can be transitioned into Voltaxic BAMA from the medium budget and onward. Whether Pure Lightning or Voltaxic BAMA will be the best version in 3.25 depends on a range of factors, including the post-nerf state of the Affliction Spectres and the nature of the prismatic clones. Based on the patch notes, the prismatic clones now convert 100% of the physical damage to the chosen element, independently of other sources of conversion. It's somewhat unclear whether they retained the ability to deal chaos damage via flat added damage or lightning to chaos conversion from Voltaxic Rift. Either way, one of these two versions will end up being one of the top minion builds in 3.25. The reason I didn't rank this build higher is because spell suppression based minion builds are a bit more finicky on League Start, and the player survivability is a bit worse compared to the other builds since it lacks life recovery on block. This issue is solved in the medium budget by the introduction of instant leech via the mastery, but this isn't available early on due to a lack of passive points and the lower attack speed of your minions. Second place goes to Lightning Ranged Animate Weapon. I briefly played a high-end version of this at the end of 3.23, and it was by far the most insane variation of Animate Weapon I ever played. Unlike most other ranged minions, Ranged Animate Weapon has a long duration, great clear speed, high single target damage, an incredibly aggressive AI, and the minions can be convocated to your position. The drawbacks are the 2-button playstyle, since you need to use Bladefall to generate lingering blades. They're then animated by the skill gem, and the fact that the weapons despawn on loading screens, including death. If you choose to play this build, you will have to level this as something else like SRS or Absolution early on, until you can access Unleash support at the end of Act 4, because it speeds up the summoning process significantly. In general, I tend to use Unleash support early on, and later rely on Eldritch Battery to quickly summon the minions. The skill gem we want to use is the Transfigure Gem Animate Weapon of Ranged Arms, which can be accessed via the lab or bought from the trade. Until then, you have to make do with the melee version. It features gear similar to the dominating blow build, but uses a convoking one crafted with Deafening Essences of Fear and minion attack and cast speed as a crafted modifier. You also want to use a 4 blue socket tri grip to convert all physical damage to lightning damage. Your Ghastly Eye jewels should feature flat added physical and lightning damage, and the flasks are unchanged compared to the first build. The low budget is comparable to the first build as well, but retains the Convoking Wand and features Lion Eyes Vision for armor and pierce support. The Animate Guardian should feature the same gear the Dominating Blow Guardian was using. For the Spectres, I recommend an Arena Master for the buff, or a Pale Seraphim for the debuff, and the Carnage and Host Chieftain for the charges. This build also greatly profits from the Affliction Spectres and should thus replace the aforementioned Spectres as soon as possible. The perfect hulking miscreation, the perfect blasphemer, and the perfect spirit of fortune are the best fit, with the latter once again allowing you to replace your wrath with haste for more damage and better mobility. Even with a more defensive setup than the one I utilized in 3.23 and the Affliction Spectres being nerfed, this will be one of the best, if not the best minion build in 3.25. It does, however, need those Spectres to outperform the Chaos version early on, so if these Spectres end up being too expensive, or you just want to be on the safe side on League Start, you should try out Chaos Ranged Animate Weapon instead. You can find the link to the build guide for Chaos Ranged Animate Weapon in the build guide playlist in the description of this video. If you're interested in low-end footage or additional League starters in general, you can check out my 3.24 League starter video. You can find the link to that video in the description as well. And last but not least, there's Chaos Holy Relic of Conviction. It's a unique permanent minion that requires the player to hit enemies in order to trigger a powerful Nova at the location of the nearest enemy. The Nova deals physical damage that can be converted to Chaos damage via natural strength, which allows for better damage scaling. While it is possible to get the base gem at the beginning of Act 1, it's advisable to play this as another build before switching to Holy Relic of Conviction for a number of reasons. The base gem has a maximum of 1 relic, and the novas are triggered around the minion instead of targeting the nearest enemy. It is also harder to trigger the nova on cooldown, since the ability that this build uses for that purpose is a transfigured gem as well, and is thus not available early on. The skill in question is Lancing Steel of Spraying, which will saturate the trigger condition by linking it to returning projectiles due to the huge amount of projectiles generated. These projectiles can also be used as a source of life recovery via life gain on hit support and to inflict withered stacks via Withering Touch to consistently get the full 15 stacks. The gear is slightly different than before. The first item you need to get is Joffrey's Crest for +1 maximum number of relics, which boosts DPS by 50%. You can start using it from level 53 onwards, and it's rather affordable. You should also use a sword rolled with a Deafening Essences of Fear and the minion attack and cast speed as a crafted modifier. This is necessary because Lancing Steel requires a sword or axe to be usable. In the low budget, you want to get Severed in Sleep and later United in Dream for Envy and Chance to Poison, since the Nova greatly profits from flat added damage. You can also make use of Dendrobate for level 10 Chance to Poison support and Aegis Aurora to add Energy Shield recovery on block, so you can recover both types of hit points at the same time. This will make the build incredibly survivable, even compared to the other block-based entries in this list. The flasks, the jewels, and the AG are comparable to the dominating Blow Guardian and the animate weapon Necromancer. The main difference is Asenath's Gentle Touch and Windscream, which are used to introduce temporal chains in order to boost poison damage and decrease action speed on single targets. For the Spectres, I recommend Carnage and Host Chieftain for the charges and a Pale Seraphim for the debuff. This build can also make use of the Affliction Spectres, and you should replace the Chieftains with the perfect Pain Artist and the perfect Hulking Miscreation as soon as possible. This build won't scale as good as the last two builds, but can still reach damage levels that are more than enough to do all content. However, PoB does not show the correct amount of DPS, it is actually considerably higher. Whether this is due to the Nova triggering more often, hitting a lot harder than it should, or the Nova hitting the same enemies multiple times is not known to me. In the end, it's all the same. The minion sports high damage from the very beginning all the way up to late game. And that's it for my Minion League starters. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can leave them in the comments. I try to get to them as soon as I can. I will stream my League Start on Twitch, and you can find my socials including Twitch, Discord, and Patreon on my channel page or in the description of this video. I hope you liked it. Until next time.